So I'm interested in the latter half of the 15th century because it's on the eve of a major transformation, redefinition of Neo-Confucianism, the dominant form of Confucianism at the time. But today is really an opportunity to try to see what happens if I can move from the kind of one person at a time work that I normally do to sort of scale up. And scaling up means, in this case, looking at the whole country of Great Ming, which is organized by provinces, in this case, prefectures in red, under which there are counties, which I'm not showing, and connected together by government highways in yellow. And this has to be staffed. And as you all know, the way China staffed its civil administration was through an examination system, civil service examination system. And that civil service examination system, which in around 1500, if we sort of extrapolate from the pass-fail ratios and the number that pass, which is only 300 at the very top level every 3 years, we can get to an estimate of a literate male public with a shared education that runs anything at the high end to 2.9 million to the low end of 650,000 or so. And there's a procedure by which I did that, but the numbers, you can choose anything in between there and it's fine, but it suggests that we have a very large public, a public with a shared literacy, but also with a shared, some shared knowledge as well. But when we look at the distribution of that examination public, based again on the people who succeed, and this is looking at some 26,000 people over the course of the dynasty, you'll see that there's a real concentration in the southeast, so that on one hand, sort of working up along or down along the southeastern coast, this area, right, modern, well, here is modern day Shanghai, but into Suzhou and that area, northern Zhejiang province, and then through this corridor, a set of river valleys running along through here down into Jiangxi, is then some scattering in Sichuan in the west and the north, but a very strong dominance of the southeast. Now, there were some consequences of having a national examination system and a system of public and private schools that prepared people. First, that there was going to be a common written language, irrespective of the dialects or the local languages. Second, that there be common genres of literary expression, only some of which were tested by the civil service examination, but many of which were, all of which we might say were common across the country. And there is a basis of common knowledge, the Confucian classics, of history since antiquity, of the history of the dynasty. And finally, a common set of conceptual schemata provided by the so-called 4 books, that is, the works of Confucius, the Analects, the Mencius, the Great Learning, the Doctrine of the Mean, but more importantly, those 4 books accompanied by a set of commentaries by Zhu Xi from the 12th century. And those commentaries then provide a sort of integrated view of a theory of learning that is based both on the natural world, the body as an organism, and on a notion or interpretation of cultural tradition. You might think of this Neo-Confucian 4 books as that Neo-Confucianism stands to Confucianism, something like Neoplatonism stands in regard to Plato. So we have this, but one of the issues that comes up is that Neo-Confucianism becomes a kind of an orthodoxy within the examination system, because those Zhu Xi's commentaries on the 4 books, so, the Neo-Confucians, the Learning of the Way, or Daoxue, becomes standardized, becomes required knowledge for the examination system, and the determination of passing or failing rests on essays written about some passage in the four books. It began as a movement that was opposed to the role of Buddhism and Taoist religious practice in social life and in moral thought. And it asserted, here's the positive side of it, that the purpose of learning was to cultivate a moral selfhood. And that individual as moral, the public individual, the official, although few of them, of course, passed the examination system, the goal of learning was to cultivate a person who could behave morally, whether or not they served in government, in their local community, in their family, and if possible in government. But at the same time, the Neo-Confucians were quite critical of other literati concerns. They were critical of the idea that literary accomplishment was a true test of personal worth. But of course, the examination system was a test of writing. Nevertheless, the arguments the Neo-Confucians made was that to make writing more important than moral cultivation was in fact to lead people away from cultivating themselves. The second thing that they were objected to is people who valued political success over moral cultivation, because after all, if political success is what mattered, one didn't have to necessarily be a moral person, as we have seen in American politics in recent years. And the third was that textual studies of the classics and commentaries were themselves suspect. Now, this would seem to go against our notion of what Confucianism is all about, because the Neo-Confucians relied heavily on their commentaries and interpretation of the four books and the five classics. But in fact, the point that they're making is that textual study alone does not entail moral action. So what I have recourse to here is the China Biographical Database, which is a project that I've been involved with for the last 15 years or so. And it has information on 210,000 people from the country of Great Ming, and 36,000 people who were born between 1470 and between 1410 and 1470. The people who would be most active during the period I'm interested in, let's say 1450 to 1510. And this is it's freely downloadable and stuff like that. But so I take out around 64 principal figures who we know a lot about, whose writings we have, who are known to be influential people as scholars, and sort of look at where they're distributed on the map. And our dark blue people are more or less associated with Neo-Confucianism. You can see they're spread particularly in those areas where the examinations are successful, but there are also people who have reputations in literature and art, in statecraft and study of the classics and various other things as well. They're sort of spread across the country. They tend to be on highway routes. And what I'm going to do then is sort of ask the question, so what are their networks? And what do we learn about their networks? This is like David and James, there's a bit of GIS and a bit of social network analysis in this talk. And so what I've done is sort of done a search for people who are connected to these 64 principles, either through teacher-student or scholarly affiliation, and through writings. And this means that one person has written for or to another. So it's not only correspondence, but also texts for social occasions, but texts that relate people together. And this is the glue, really, that held literati society together outside of government service. And when we look at the distribution of the 1,287 people that come up with that search, we see, wow, that's a nice national distribution, isn't it? But when we group them by place, we see something like this, right? We see a distribution of those associations of the 64 principal scholars that's really focused on the Southeast. We put that on top of a heat map of the civil service examination degree holders. We see once again that it really correlates quite well with that heat map, and particularly with the Southeast. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that it's a national network only to a degree. There are people that are involved in it who are spread across the country, but it's really concentrated in certain areas. The second thing I did was sort of look at this in a network analysis program. And you'll see that what a network analysis program does, it runs various algorithms to find communities, to define centrality, various kinds of centrality. And sort of that's what it looks like with color. And then I start to put people on top of it. And let me get to something that's more manageable. So now I've only allowed people who have at least 7 or 8 connections to somebody else. And you're not going to read the Chinese, but up here in the left, these are people who are all have literary concerns and whose reputation is based on their literary achievement. And here on the lower right, from the east to the southwest, drawing a line right through here, are people who are very much regarded as Neo-Confucian teachers and Neo-Confucian figures. So what this suggests, and this is the point that I think we learn from this, is in fact that although there are lots of connections, national connections, there are local concentrations, that there's a real division between Neo-Confucians and particularly other kinds of scholars, other kinds of literati. And that the major division is between the literary figures and the Neo-Confucian figures. That's another way. I ran some other algorithms and we get the same results. So that line is going to go right through here with the people in the lower left-hand quadrant being literary people, and the Neo-Confucians still playing a dominant role, but really a separate role. And that's where I wanted to end up with that general effect, the scaling up, seeing that in fact we have a competitive world, both in terms of space and in terms of topic. We also have a project going on now to take all the extant letters from the Ming Dynasty and find out their addressees, right? And around 20,000 letters. But that's just been launched. So that's it.